United States. All we're wanting to do is change the world, and then we go beyond that, but that's later on, and to change the future for the better. So these are just small things that we thought we would come together and really begin to harvest from all the great ideas that we have heard from this meeting. And so as if I may briefly do this, if you don't mind, because I would abbreviate your introductions in a way that I don't want to. I'm just going to ask everyone to briefly identify themselves so that they can pick exactly what they want to. And then spoiler alert here, what we will be asking, first of all, is for the panelists, once we've done that really lightning round self-introduction, is to, if there's something that any of you think that there's been a gap in this meeting that just hasn't come out as yet, we'll come to you and ask you to share that with everyone, because that certainly may be the case. And then as this session is titled, how do we apply what we have learned today to real-world practice? And so we'll also be asking you to address just that. What are the most important things to apply that you have heard from this conference, and how do we do that, kind of, sort of? So we're kind of coming up with our action agenda resulting from this meeting. And this is not going to be just the panel talking to you. We want all of you to be thinking about that also as we go through this harvesting and socializing of ideas. So what is our time frame? When do we need this group to end? Okay. Well, okay, we're intentionally shortening the last. Is everybody okay with that? All right. The last, just to let you know, we'll be going to breakout groups. So again, this is our last time together as a whole. So we want to harvest from that. So if we may start with introductions and maybe start with Kofi, and then we'll go down with just briefly in what you consider most important to kind of get everybody grounded in you as a person and what you're about.
Sorry. My name is Kofi Berko Jr. I'm a senior environmental scientist at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I work in a small public health office, known as Office of Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes. And I'm actually in a division that actually gives out money. We promote the healthy home concept, and then we give out money to researchers to conduct studies on things around the home that affects our health. It's been an interesting conference so far. This is my first time attending this conference. It's been interesting, but I noticed that there's something really missing, and that has to do with things that I'm interested in and things that I do. We've had a lot of discussion about office space, how making the office a great place to work and great environment to boost productivity. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, you can't stay in the office. You have to go home. And if you go home, it's your home just like the office. That's a big question. When you look at the office space, it's easy to talk about improving the office environment because the money doesn't come from you. It's your employer. And we're talking about commercial buildings here. So the money is there to do it, to improve productivity. Bottom line, it's at the end of the day, it's going to increase the bottom line of the employer. But when you go to your home, that's your house, and do you have the money to effect those changes so that you don't only enjoy the good health from your office, but you also enjoy it in the built environment that you stay in? And remember, in the office, you are active and moving. At home, most of the time, you are sleeping. So you breathing in anything bad that's in there, you're taking it in passively. Apart from that, at home, you are an active contributor to the pollution in the house. You cook. You clean. Do you clean well? You have pest problems. All those things, your behavior affects the environment, unlike the office that you are the receiving end. So I just want to throw this in so that we also think about those things. And then I think maybe during the question time, maybe I'll throw in a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kofi. So introduction by Kofi, and identification of a gap, or at least something that's been underemphasized here, and that's home and the time spent there and what occurs there. Angela, same sort of thing, brief introduction of yourself, and then anything that you think has been missing or that you would want to underscore.
I'm Angela Smith. As I think you've heard already, you've probably figured out that physical activity is my focus. I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. I think a number of people in this group have wondered, what in the world am I doing in a place like this full of designers and masters of public health folk? I came into this because I decided that there was no way to increase physical activity by the population without putting barriers in people's way. I think you either have to put something in front of someone that they have to go over, around, under, through, or they won't get moving. And I think we've seen examples of this today. So I'm a past president of the American College of Sports Medicine and really wanted to bring to my year the idea that fitness can be fun, but for those for whom fitness isn't fun, it needs to become unavoidable. So I'm going to ask that we come back in right after this lightning round, and I've got a question for everybody.
Okay, excellent, great. Thank you, Angela. Fernando, same thing.
Thanks for having me. My name is Fernando Arias, and I am a former architect that got really interested in the big picture. And by way of the Clinton Global Initiative, I found myself working now at the American Society of Interior Designers, spearheading a large education effort on educated, informing, training, organizing the interior design profession around sustainability, health and wellness, resiliency, and how to take those concepts and apply them broadly to the profession. I think a gap that I would want to chat about is, Whitney prompted me to think about this too. So we have artwork that goes into office spaces that does some unintended effects or harm. So I was wondering if we ever think about the pets that we bring into offices. I know that I am currently part of WeWork, and our offices have temporarily relocated there, and so we see a lot of little critters running around. And the dogs, from a positive and a problematic perspective. You know, what are the psychological benefits? What are the productivity, engagement, and all of those benefits that animals in an office environment bring? But then what are the liabilities in terms of pathogens or the kinds of things that the little animals can introduce into the environment that are unintended consequences of their occupation with humans?
Great, thank you. And just to interject, dog walking with the Surgeon General's call to action on walking walkable communities is actually an important strategy that is being emphasized. Susanna? Please.
Does that show that we actually improve the human biome, the human gut biome, by having dogs in our states? Answer that.
Well, I think a debate may break out here any moment. So
cats over here, dogs over there.
Excellent. Excellent. Susanna, same thing, brief introduction, any gap or point you would want to emphasize?
I did not expect our panel to take that turn. Thank you. I'm Suzanna Kelley. I'm the Managing Director of Strategic Alliances and Initiatives at the AIA. I am an architect. And I came to the Institute as a staff member 13 years ago, very passionate about topics of licensure and the path to licensure for architects. I'm sure many of you know that architects have a very long matriculation through education, internship, and examination, and we've made incredible strides since my time of getting licensed, even to provide more opportunities for architects, young architects, to get licensed. And so my work has evolved at AIA, focus on strategic relationships, large complex relationships that the AI has with organizations both domestically and internationally, as well as our initiatives portfolio. Think of them as special projects. And for the last few years, we've been very focused on sustainability. We have 4 areas that we focus in. 2 that are really core to the work of an architect every day, that is energy and materials selection, specifications. And then two that are emerging, and those are design and health and resilience. So I lead the design and health effort. Last 3 years, we've been working on 3 different areas. Mostly our 3 sort of levers for change are the areas of research, policy, and education. And I would say that the thing that I would like to talk more about is policy, because we can do lots of work. I mean, organizations like ASID and AIA, we can educate the heck out of this topic. But if an architect is selected too late in the process and the building site is already chosen, or there are zoning restrictions that don't allow for active transportation, or all kinds of limitations, I think, in the policy environment that we need to work to mitigate so that we bring all these things together. So we reduce the barriers in the political environment to allow these kinds of healthy places to exist, at the same time that we're bringing architects along and interior designers and others, planners in that space, to know how to implement these. The third component to that is the public, and ensuring that clients are asking for it, that they understand the value of it, that they know that there's a market driver for this, and that there's a reason why they should do it, because it's good for their employees, because it's good for their communities, because it's good for their bottom line, right? And that's okay. So I'd like to talk more about policy if we have that opportunity.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So before I come back to the panel for elaboration of things, it's open mic time, and it would be great to hear from any of you of things that you think may be a gap, just hasn't been appropriately gone over, or things that you would want to emphasize. And it's even fair game if you shared the idea in a presentation and you still think it needs to be emphasized. That's fair also. We're just trying to get a priority list here and create a framework from this. Please.
Hi, I'm Barbara Hewlett, and I design healthcare facilities, have my whole professional life. And probably the last 30 years, I have focused on healing environments, trying to discover what they are. And they're quite mystical. I think today it was brought up of how complex health is. And that's what we're searching for, is health. And in looking at healthcare environments as hospitals and senior living, I have found that you need to have, in a healthy building, you have to design for the body, the mind, and the spirit. And we have focused the first year almost exclusively on our roundtables on the body. Then we brought on the mind, and today exploring the mind, but we haven't touched the spirit. And the spirit is really that of the emotions, the feelings, the experiences, and how they interact together with the body and the mind and what they do to each other to really create a healing environment. I had one physician say in one of his prescriptions that go home and take 2 sunsets. And the idea of art, what is the value of art? What is the value of beauty in healing? And when we look at environments that are ugly and grotesque, I often think of Viktor Frankl's In Man's Search for Meaning, who spent 3 years in Auschwitz. And he, through those years of survival, and what made him survive was not air quality and toxicity and nutrition and movement, but it was his search for meaning and how he found, and other companions in the camp, found it in beauty, to the point they even gave up a crust of bread to go out and see a sunset. So I think we can't underestimate the value of beauty and the whole aesthetic quality, both man-made and natural, of how important it is to healing. And I think that should be another focus for this group.
Excellent. You bet.
So if y'all will indulge me, everybody close your eyes for 1 minute. And I want you to imagine something, okay? For 1 minute. Imagine you're in a place with natural daylight, with natural circadian light, with natural views, trees, vistas, water, natural acoustics, soundscapes, water, bird songs, temperature control, whatever you find naturally comfortable for you. Something that is a fragrance that's natural and personally positive for you. Think about something that feels comfortable to you in your culture. Something that brings trees in, plants, whatever is under you, dirt, water. Now, within that place, feel that you're free to move around, that you're free to interact with your neighbor, whoever is there, animals, plants, other people, something that helps you be active, something that lets you be fun, having fun fitness activity. And imagine maybe that you even walked to this place, that you swam to this place, that you climbed a tree in this place. Imagine what you feel like as you're doing that. Imagine that place in every single detail you can. Now open your eyes, and I'm going to ask 3 people to describe their places. Angela. And I'm going to try to pick 3 different cultures. Okay? Angela. I like the name.
I had a lot of plants. I had a lot of natural sunlight views.
Microphone.
I could bike there, and I was able to move around a lot in the space. Like I had bocce balls, and I could sit, stand, desk. You asked me to someplace you're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sit, stand, desk, and a lot of plants and actual ventilation, like windows that opened or doors that opened.
So you're in an indoor space.
Well, I started with an outdoor space. Actually, I originally
Indoor,
thought about
outdoor?
the British countryside I was just in recently, which is very pastoral and calming. But then I thought we were talking about buildings, so I switched to buildings.
Okay, Fernando.
I'll represent the Hispanics today.
Tomorrow, something else. On to other things tomorrow.
I like that this panel is going into all kinds of loose stuff. I will say that I appreciated thinking about my balcony. I have the excellent pleasure of living in a really awesome apartment in Adams Morgan that I would never have been able to realize in New York. And so when I look to the right, that's usually where the sunsets are, and I've got Rock Creek Canyon and a bunch of trees there. And yeah, so when I come home sometimes, and especially with the nice weather, it's just I could just throw the bags down and just sit there for like I don't know how long sometimes, and feel like it's all worth it. So it gives me a lot of hope.
Joyce.
I go back to actually my father's favorite spot in Hong Kong, where we look out to the water. And I think many people associate with water with different elements. I think the calmness, and this was just a harbor with ships going and ferries going, but the idea of being able to look down. You saw the hillside. Hong Kong is a lot like that, and being able to see the topography and the mountains and the water. A lot of buildings are built facing south, with the backside to the north, and all of those are natural ventilation technique that were really age-old. And being in that environment is wonderful.
So this is my point exactly, that we've heard a lot today about how to utilize modern technology to measure things that we find very interesting scientifically. And I'm a scientist, I'm a physician. But I agree with you. I think what we're all after is nature. Everything that we talked about was natural. Everything that we're trying to get rid of is that which is unnatural. So as much as I want to spend the rest of this time talking about how important it is to be physically active, physical activity is part of being natural. And I don't want us to lose the baby for the bathwater, because I think we all appreciate what's natural. Angela and I had to walk outside into the air because we felt that we'd been inside all day, and we walked out into the rain for 2 minutes. So these are all important things that I think are also another gap, and I think we all feel the same thing and see the same thing, but it's not that much different from designing a glass box that happens to have windows with screens on it that you can close them every now and then, and you have natural circadian light with natural odors, with natural fragrances. Occasionally you inject some natural microbiome into it, which is really important, and you do some natural physical activity. So while we're talking about data and design, which is obviously critical because that's where we all are these days, we need to not forget the basics.
Great. Excellent. That was a great pivot off the beauty. I think, yes, Fernando, please.
Can I come back a little bit to the beauty thing?
Yes.
So when I was a student learning a lot about architectural history and then the humanities as well, I was really struck by the change from the arts and crafts movement, the application of ornament on buildings, to modernism, and the way that rapid prototyping, prefabricated construction became the norm after World War II. And in my interactions with the interior design community, I hear a lot about this desire to, in my words, kind of return to a place of allegory where you can read buildings, where you can see ornament, where you can see beauty. I think that the challenge, and probably the reason why it's not more mainstream beauty, ornament, is cost, is bottom lines, is metrics. And so I think that I'm not sure if we have a way of quantifying the aesthetic, the beauty, the ornament, into something that is buildable, scalable, fabrication ready kind of thing. Maybe 3D prototyping will change that to some extent. But as a former yoga teacher, I say former a lot, but you know, as a
Anything now?
yeah, no. I'll make it. Bring it together. But when I was a yoga teacher, I also was very connected to the notion of the spirit. And I think that my physiological understanding of that was in the way that I experienced my own serotonins and various nervous system responses. So I think that if we want to talk about beauty, if we want to talk about biophilia, if we want to talk about things that trigger a sensibility of ease, that's why we can't so much get away from the data or the quantifiable stuff, because it translates into money.
Great, excellent. Are there any follow-up points on, any follow-up comments on this point? Yes. Whoops. Please.
I think we underestimate really the value of biophilia in design. There is so much evidence that what we ought to do is be requiring people to say why they're not including nature in their buildings or in their landscapes. See, I'm from Seattle, and Seattle is just getting rid of all of the neighborhood trees, building apartment buildings as big as they can in some areas, because we've got so many people coming in to work at high-tech firms, particularly Amazon, is going to put 50,000 people in a small area of Seattle. So there's no room for trees. And we yet talk about this, but it's not in the policy, it's not in the design standards, it's nowhere that says, people, you have to do this or justify why you're not, or send money to sort of a conservancy. We know the evidence. We all were thinking about natural spaces, Angela, but we don't design as if we knew that. And that's where policy, as Michelle was saying, that we've got to get it into policy and building standards, or people have to explain why they're not doing it.
Okay, great. One related comment, and then we'll look for a new topic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
To what Judy was saying in a previous comment, I do believe that it needs to be quantified, and there's some great work that's quantifying it. I think the architects and the designers in the room will realize there's a real limit to quantification. It doesn't get to the spirit of a place, and so we need to find a better way to join those two. Some of the research has been bandied about, like, 10 trees equals 10 years of your life, or I think it's 7 years of your life. Maybe so, but we can't forget that there's the artistry of it. But the second thing that I wanted to, and that's not always well done in research or on the engineering side, The second thing I wanted to say is I think we need to remember the cultural side, and I'm glad you brought that up, because though there's lots of great research, as Judy's talking about, in biophilia, there's also some really big cultural differences, and we can't assume, and we have to be aware of our own cultural biases and values of what we've been told nature is. It's not just lollipop trees in a park. That nature is multiple different ways of doing, and that different cultures have different versions of what's scary, what's acceptable, what's ugly, what's disease-ridden. We have a long history of Victorian sanitation movement, which got all nature out of the city as fast as possible. And if we think that we're not still influenced by those ideas of disease, then we're going to have projects that fail. We have to take those values and those symbolism into account.
Excellent. Good, good. One last point on this topic.
As I walk
Back
us
there,
back
please.
to Mark, let me just point out that new NICU was beautiful.
Well, I think what we have here is an engineering problem. The reason is there's a classic problem in engineering called impedance mismatch. And probably a more lay example is if you have a nuclear physicist trying to describe physics to an 8th grader, you've got an impedance mismatch. It's not that the information isn't good. It's not that the 8th grader is not smart enough. It just means that they're not processing the information the same way. So we see this graph, and I gave that same graph before, where 98% or 92% of what the cost of building is the occupants inside. It's not a new thought, but what you have is the people who are controlling the buildings are the ones that are going to look at how many watts per square foot, what's the dollars per square foot, and all this stuff that we're talking about is information, but it's not getting through. So it's really fundamentally, how do you get the information into a digestible format that allows people to make practical decisions about improving the environment? And until you solve that engineering problem, I think we're just talking to ourselves. That's the thing that leadership comes to grips with, is being able to overcome that impedance mismatch. And I just think that's really the heart of what it is we need to address.
Excellent. Let's resolve among ourselves that we will at least have a first step by the time we adjourn, or by the time of the end of this session. We'll have a first step to begin to address just that point, because I think it's actionable.
So I just want to key off of that, because after your talk, I think you're 100% right that what you need in order to instantiate these principles into practice and policy is all of the elements that you talked about. We're very fortunate to have Kevin Campshire here, who is a leader on the instantiating side. I think this group, as it has evolved over the years, and Charles, I have to give you credit for persistence when
Yeah, indeed.
when I was at NIH, and the structure of NIH is such that the architects and the facilities people do not have the kind of say and power that the molecular biologists and directors of the various institutes at NIH have. And yet we have come to the point with this incredible group of leaders, thought leaders in each of the different spheres. We have industry here. We have different industry representatives. We have, Bay Area startups. We have big former Bay Area startups, but now much bigger than that. And we have academe, we have the licensing organizations, we have the standard-setting organizations. We have the right elements in this group. So we're not just talking to ourselves. We are the leaders, all of us, in each of our industries. I remember when I was trying to do the same thing with the science of the mind-body connection, and each of us who started that field now probably 30 years ago or so were chased into our individual corners by the parent disciplines from which we sprang. And were not only ignored, but as you pointed out, berated by those parent disciplines. You're smiling because you're a yoga guy, but
So many roles.
Yeah, so we had the good fortune, those few of us who started it out, to be part of a MacArthur Foundation network that gave us that support that you described. And I think in this sense, the GSA is giving us the support that you described. We're now able to bring in other federal agencies, the Department of Defense, the NIH. You know, the fact that Bill Riley spent so much time here is pretty impressive. He's leading the sensor development piece of the Precision Medicine Initiative. That's pretty darn good. So I think we're not there yet, it's true, but we're getting there because each and every one of us goes back to our spheres of influence, and it's a ripple effect, and we will change the landscape of health.
Excellent. Well stated. Other comments, strategies? And again, what I would like to do before we adjourn this session is to have some clear sense of action of what we would like to do. As the CEO of the American College of Sports Medicine, I'm always looking at how do we change things, how do we transform things, as you do. I'll just lay out one strategy, which I think has actually already been alluded to. There clearly is a professional strategy here of focusing on professions, as with architects, but with others. I mean, that could be, depending on what part of the conference you wanted to focus on, it could be worksite wellness, worksite health promotion professionals that actually, I'm going to be later on this month at a meeting with a Fortune 25 company, very interested in doing some remarkable things in regard to worksite health promotion, productivity. The kinds of things that we've talked about at this meeting aren't quite on that radar screen as yet, maybe a little bit. So that's something. There's a whole industry of worksite wellness professionals that are out there. Human resource professionals also. If we're looking at how to drive change, you can begin, as you were alluding to, you would begin to really, one strategy is to focus on the professions that are most relevant and arguably most changeable, and to really drive it that way. There has been, if you start looking at associations and professions over time, from the 1800s to the 1900s to now, they have driven change because they begin to define the norm, they establish standards for the norm, and depending on the rigidity of those, not much happens without changing those professions. So that's one strategy that I would propose that that could be actionable for us. We have others already, but I would like to come up with 3, maybe no more than 5 things that we have a good sense these are actionable. Harvesting from these great comments, that we actually could translate that into action and strategy using really, you know, the whole idea of scale and spread and diffusion. We have lots of connections among us. This isn't just this number of people represented in this room. You're connected with all kinds of organizations. You know how to drive change, and we can begin to do that. We just need to focus on what is it that we are going to concentrate on, and how do we get that started. Other comments and ideas, please. Let's see. I have no idea how to call on people from here. Yeah, please, Jonathan.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm thinking of, these ideas have been great, and they can be really exciting. Of course, I gravitate to what Angela says, which is probably the least exciting thing that we could possibly engage in, but unfortunately, at least in my experience, I spent 20 years doing design and construction projects, which were a lot of fun. And then I decided to go into policy because I thought I can really influence things and make them better for the people who are doing design and construction projects. And then I found the people doing policy were more interested in doing design and construction projects. So the thing is that we have to get there. We have to focus on that and also understand several things about the different levels of people working on this problem. So at HUD makes checklists for inspectors to go around and look at housing. The question is, what are the questions on that list? The same thing that CMS, or Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they have checklists as well. And there are panels that argue for years about adding a question or taking a question off. But those are the things that can make really big impact so that an untrained, well, let's say someone with the skill to go out and do checklists can really influence someone's home. Is it safe or is it not? That's one level. At the other end, there are things that we take for granted, I think, that we see as black boxes. And this is another thing that I've been writing about, which is the economic decision-making process. So when you talk about the building manager who is concentrating on saving money on energy efficiency, well, half of GSA's office space is leased. What benefit does the building owner get from having productive people in the workplace. I mean, it's an externality of running the healthiest building they can. Then they compete on the basis of price, generally, when they go to lease the space. And then once the space is occupied, they're focused on making money. So even big corporations, I would argue, actually, even in the federal government, in owned buildings, the people running the buildings are trying to run them as economically as possible because they have their own fixed budgets. So those are the kinds of really boring things that people have been talking about for years. But the thing is that we could have huge impacts if we begin to pry those open. And the people, I'd like to think that no one's out there consciously, doing harm, except maybe a few architects, famous architects. But in terms of talking to these people, they mean to do good. They think they're doing good, but they don't understand the health impacts of these sorts of things in policy, in checklists, things like that could really have a great impact. I think that's something that all of the scientific research that's presented here is more than convincing, and it's also nice because it opens lots of doors, different ways of thinking. But that's my thought of let's do something that's less fun, perhaps.
Okay, Jonathan, before you give up the mic, just one. Can you give us 60 seconds on how we might do that, or 30 seconds, or how would we go about addressing this big picture thing that what's the first step in doing that?
Well, I think the speaker who was talking about the champions, in the government, outside the government, that definitely is it. It's something very hierarchical. So I would say, and it depends on who's running different organizations, because it really affects the whole culture. So something like the Office of Management and Budget sort of is the biggest, sort of picture thing in the government. But frankly, it's something like if the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and the head of the EPA all decide to get together and make a point of this. I mean, that's how things happen in the government on a big scale. And I think it's fantastic to have the governor of Michigan talking about something like that, like promoting physical activity. Those are the kinds of things that there are people out there. I think people must have been amazed to see something like that. I mean, I was amazed to see that.
Excellent. So an appointed or elected officer strategy, one official strategy, one of those. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Who's next?
I just have to piggyback on that comment about
Let the mic come to you so that we get this.
bringing federal agencies together to work on this. So, GSA is a member of the National Prevention Council, which was mentioned in a previous presentation. 20 plus federal agencies who've all committed to a strategy. There's 3 core commitments that all the agencies are working on together. And, we presented Fitwell to the acting Surgeon General, Dr. Lushanak, and he was so excited about Fitwell, he wanted to co-brand Fitwell with the Surgeon General's seal because he understood what impact that has in terms of, public being confident in it and trusting it and, the whole anti-smoking, anti-tobacco campaign. So I do think that the right people in the government have organized, but I do think that there are some key organizations that maybe aren't at the table. And there's a separate committee within the National Prevention Council that is with private organizations and non-federal organizations. And so anyone in this room should probably be able to participate, that if you're not federal, in that process. And I attended one of those meetings, and it was really powerful to see all the collaborations. If I can also make a comment to the panel, I would be interested in hearing, we're working with CDC, we're very interested in behavioral design and choice architecture. So when Angela said those people who don't like to exercise, let's make it so that they have no choice. So, designing cafeterias or providing healthy food in a manner that, you're making a healthy choice without even realizing that you're making a healthy choice. Or designing a building so you get activity in because you have to walk to the bathroom or you have to go, get a drink of water. So I'd be curious, and that could apply even, I think, to homes. We know people who live in a townhome with steps, are more physically fit than people who live in a ranch-style house, right, where everything's convenient. So I'd be interested to hear from the panel if you have any ideas of things we could include in an effort that would relate to behavioral design or choice architecture.
Okay, let's let the panel discuss that just briefly. Any points that any of you would have responding to that? And then also for the panel, we'll go back to the audience immediately after this. Also for the panel, if you have, coming up, if you have any questions or propositions that you would want to present to the audience for their response back to you, that would be great as well. But to the point just made, comments, please?
Yeah. Our office sponsored studies by Rutgers University in Bronx. I can't remember the name of the development, but it was in 2009, and it was under a Green and Healthy Homes initiative. And what it did was they took an old building, converted it into apartment complex. I think it was 4 floors. And they moved the elevator from the middle of the building to the end of the building. So when you enter the building, you have to walk further to the elevator, and then they put the stairway right in the middle, put murals on the wall, and had cool, soothing music in the stairway. And that was just one of the interventions. Another intervention, they put in a rooftop garden. And at the end of the day, what they found was that most of the people in the vicinity were able to reduce obesity in the building because most people were using the staircase. The elevator wasn't used as much as they used previously. Almost all the residents were involved in the rooftop garden because the unit was the building was located in a food desert. There wasn't fresh food stores or groceries around that area, so most of the residents were using the vegetables from the rooftop garden, and it showed a lot of improvement in the health of the residents. Unfortunately, the sample size was too small to draw distinct generalization. I think the award was about I think about $600,000. So it wasn't that much. They couldn't recruit that many people. But that's one of the problems with our studies. Our studies are small studies, and we don't have that much. We don't get that much funds to really do large-scale studies so that we could generalize, draw generalized conclusions from that, and then push it on to policy level.
What are the groups? There must be some in this room, if not yours, which may be yours as well. What are the carrots and what are the sticks to help that kind of situation become policy? Obviously, Fitwell or Well Standard, all of those are voluntary, and a place that's in lower socioeconomic status is not going to be able to typically apply for those. So what are the carrots and what are the sticks that are out there federally or statewide?
So a stick is building code, and so that's a requirement, and it's not a national, it's not federal, it's local, which makes it very, very difficult to normalize because every jurisdiction adopts a code at its own level, and they often modify it. So if you're an architect, you know that even living in or working in an area like we do here in the DC region, I'm licensed in the District of Columbia, but if I do a project in Bethesda, Maryland, the code is different. So I have to know what that jurisdiction wants. I think the other, so that's a stick, but where a carrot is like a standard like LEED or something that would be voluntary. I think another group, I want to sort of segue over and then come back to this question. Another group that's not represented here, or maybe is represented but could be a louder voice, is our code officials, because those are the people who are in our buildings and giving us that certificate of occupancy. And I think what we find is that many times code officials aren't educated about whether it be energy standards or now if we're talking about health standards, what those performance metrics really are, and if we move to a performance-based code system, which would allow more of these things to happen rather than a prescriptive code, which most jurisdictions have today, and really bind an architect to their ability to design a beautiful integrated space. So code officials, I would say, is another group that we should be thinking about. But I also want to say, Joyce, you mentioned in your presentation about the first building in Michigan to have a universal design certification. And I think universal design is something that we should be thinking about when we think about moving the elevator to the other end of the building. Because even though you don't want able-bodied people to take that elevator, there could be a disabled person in that building who needs that elevator. So if you're forcing that person to walk so far that, say, they have an unintended fall, then that's not a good consequence of this. So I think we really need to think about universal design. How do we design for everyone, all needs and abilities in a building?
And I also wanted to pick up on that. Thanks for bringing up universal design. So it was brought up about stairs and residential typologies. And through the work that we're engaged with AARP and the World Economic Forum around designing for longevity, I think a big issue that we are looking to study deeply is what do we synergize between, for example, resilient design and adapting for resilient conditions and residential typologies, particularly as we look at 2017 and beyond as the trigger year for there being more people over the age of 50 worldwide than under the age of 50. So the population changes that are coming, because I think that will drive a lot of the application of building standards and codes. And so for ASID, I think a lot of the way that we approach the thinking of residential design inside and out, it's very sort of hinging on this notion of designing for all age groups, all special needs groups, and multiple generations in different building types.
Can I segue on that now? I've been handing this back and forth.
Sorry, please, of course.
I wanted to
You have 15 minutes. No, please.
15 seconds. I wanted to add that I think the group that we're forgetting in this whole conversation is the users, the grassroots, the people, the mothers of children, the children. One of my big pet peeves since I've come into the government from private industry is that somebody out there in an office someplace is making policy and plans, and I'm thinking, why don't you ask me? You don't even know anything about what you're asking me to do. You're just making policy. And then, I get this thing on my desk. I'm just exaggerating a little bit for effect here. But I get something on my desk that says, all right, now you have to do this, this, and this. And I'm saying, well, how about having a conversation about this? It's the user, it's the people. A lot of these things that have really come into big money and big popularity are because of the grassroots. The Fitbit, that wasn't a policy that somebody made or a edict that we must wear Fitbits and be more fit. It was people like my best friend calling me up and saying, hey, I got this neat gadget. I want you to get online and compete with me. It's fun, and we're getting a lot of exercise, and I feel better. And it's all these millions of these us's, the people, pushing these things. So when you asked about so that's sort of a carrot in a way, but when you asked, how can we accomplish some of this, one of the things we started, and I wasn't going to actually advertise this, but now I am because I think it's relevant, is that we started some work groups within the organization working on this matrix that originally was sort of made for the lay people to explain what the benefit to them is and have them input. Why should we do this? Consider doing this instead of sitting at your desk looking at the computer all day. Consider getting up and walking to the cafeteria and don't eat lunch with your computer.
Could you identify what organization you're talking?
This one.
Oh, I see.
HIBR. Us.
I see.
Well, it's not just NIH, it's HIBR.
Yeah.
But anyway, we have a couple of work groups working on this, and we've actually come up with a pilot on it, and it's fun, it's educational, it's scalable because it can be used either for the lay people, which I think is where some of this should start, because I think that's where we're going to get the backing for the economic part of it. We can't just say you're going to do this and that, and we don't have budgets, and people don't want to be told what to do and what they're going to have to do. But if 1 billion people tell you this is what we need and want, then it's going to get done. So I think that, that's a vehicle just as a start. I mean, I'm sure there are many other kinds of vehicles that we could actually, instead of just all this wonderful show and tell, something solid that we can actually put our heads together, work together in relationships and build.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think maybe a quick action point on
please.
that, Jim, is that we need to have consumer goods, consumer products folks in these conversations for next year. Because certainly I think without considering these folks in any economic condition, really the products world is also a key driver of health at home or in the office. And I think that that's something what you're describing is what's the consumer dimension to it.
Create the movement.
Great. Before we hear from Esther, I want to say we got about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to ask the panel to be thinking in terms of what they have heard. What are the most, in terms of applying what we have learned, what you consider the most important opportunity? So we'll do that from the panel, and then we'll ask the audience as well. But Esther, next, please.
So actually, it speaks to that. So I want to use the example of how we, in the field of the science of mind-body connection, went to integrative medicine being instantiated into medical practice, going from a shishi-foo-foo, ignored sort of area to something that is in use today and is becoming just good medicine. It's not everywhere, but it's getting there. And it's a war. It's not a battle. It's not a single thing that you do. But this group here has the potential to do several of these action items. I think the first and low-hanging fruit that could come out of this meeting is a publication that has the weight of several government agencies. You've got the GSA, you've got NIH, you've got HHS, the list goes on. You've got the public-private partnership. And where you publish it in the highest impact journal or journals, and we're doing the AIA. So we're doing this with the American Institute of Architects. It takes a strategic planning to speak to all the audiences that you want to speak to, the public, the private sector, federal government, local and regional governments. And I would advise that the AIA advise you on this because they're well into this process. So I think that's the first thing that should come out of this group is one or several publications. With integrative medicine, we did a National Academy of Sciences publication, which gave it the stamp of approval of that organization. I don't know if NIH would be willing to come out with something like that, but I think you need to think about where to publish such a thing. And then there's all of the other things that we've talked about. I don't want to take the whole floor, but I just wanted to make that one point that I think the simplest thing we can do on the basis of this and all, I presume this is recorded, not just on the web somewhere, take the transcripts and have the speakers give little blurbs, and you can have a publication.
Excellent. Great. Good. Additional comments from the audience? Let's keep it brief, and then we're going to come back to the panel for them to begin to prioritizing what they think are the most actionable, applicable things, and then we'll open it up for the audience to do so as well. Go for it. It's you.
So I had a question. This is a phenomenal panel because you represent leadership in translating this message to a membership of tens of thousands of people. And I'll put HUD as also part of that as well, and that you're educating, that you're training, that you are disseminating a message. And so as leaders represent your specific groups and bodies of professionals that subscribe to your organizations and groups, I'd like to hear from you in synthesizing today, what do you need from us? And does that come in the form of education, expertise areas, translation? What are your members saying to you? Like, I'll give you an example of even some of our work together, right? Architects saying, yes, I want to do this. Would I in any way, how do I know it's going to work? right? So is there some kind of conversation around contracts or fees? Or how do I go in front of a client and say it's worth spending the extra money and time? And that's a very manageable membership type. Well, it's a big issue in itself, but just kind of an example of what are your members saying? What do they need? What are you hearing?
Excellent.
So I'll just say from, I'm sorry, did I? From the perspective of the AIA, we have 87,000 members, and we moved along the curve of awareness to adoption really quickly on this topic. I mean, I thought we would be building awareness on health for 5 years, at least. And it was like maybe 18 months, and I started to hear, okay, how do I do that? No, how do I do that? How do I do that? You mentioned this in your presentation, Whitney. It's really true. We have, if 15 years ago, the movement around energy and LEED moved at a pace X, health is moving at X squared third, maybe to the third or fourth power. It's moving very rapidly. So we're looking for tools. And I noted a few things today that in some of your presentations, in particular, Mariana, your circadian tool for architects to test the lux value related to circadian function was a great example of something that I can put into the hands of my members and they can begin to use tomorrow. I think we have to wrap education around that, right? But we already have a course on AIU about circadian rhythms. So maybe packaging those together would be really useful. I think what I'm understanding from my colleagues in our education department is that adult education, good adult education, not just, butts and seats, but good adult education is complex, and it involves pairing different types of learning together in order to create really applicable tools and resources. So that's what I want, is more stuff like that. Hey, I got a tool on my website. Check this out. That's what I want to hear.
Let me make a comment on that line. Years ago, we wrote an AIA primer on LCA, and it is on the AIA website. To this day, I get emails saying, can I get this? And I just send the website. But I think putting things like that, and it was not terribly short. The people obviously read it. So if we do more of that and go to everybody's website and target it for their people, I think we get the word out.
Can you send me that link?
Yeah. Suzanna, just real briefly, who were the change agents? Who drove the change in AIA on this matter?
I was chatting with somebody about this earlier. The AIA has been talking about the topic of health now for going on 15 years, and we started in the early 2000s in the neurosciences area. You're all, I'm sure, familiar with the Academy for Architecture for Neurosciences. But a real pivot point for us was when the granddaddy of design and health, Dick Jackson, was on our board as a public member, and he pretty much slapped us around and said, you guys need to pay attention because you're the ones who can make this, you can make this happen. Our board took that to note, and then after that, a series, I would say, of AI leaders at various levels. But what's been, I think, unique about our approach to this change effort has been one of interdisciplinary activity. We have not ever assumed that architects can do this alone. Our design and health leadership group is comprised of both architects and doctors, and one of our greatest challenges is vocabulary because we don't speak the same language. But I think those kinds of change agents, both at the highest level, at the board level, as well as at the knowledge leader level, the missing piece, in my opinion, Joyce, are chapters. Right, we got to get our chapters on board. We only have one chapter, and it's DC. God bless them, that have a local design and well-being committee. where there are many, many, many Committee on the Environments, I don't want to wait 30 years for there to be many, many, many committees on health. So, so that would be a missing link for me as leadership at the chapter level.
Okay, excellent. Any any additional brief responses to Whitney's question? What do you, in membership societies, membership organizations, what do you need?
Well, from HARD's perspective, I think what HARD would really need, what would really be helpful, it's Congress giving us the flexibility to implement programs. Even though we directly or indirectly control 80% of housing in America, our influence on housing, it's not as great as a lot of people think. Something like public housing, the money really just passes through HUD. We just control the financial part, and I think Jonathan mentioned having a checklist. My office, Office of Healthy Homes, Lead Hazard Control and Healthy Homes, we've been trying to change things. We've been trying to add radon to that checklist. And all we are even asking is just they should just ask whether the unit, the property has been tested for radon. And we've been doing that. We've been doing that for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years. And we haven't, and it's the same HUD. That's a different office. And we haven't been able to do that. Reason, the money, public housing, the money just passes through HUD. The control, it's with, the control of HUD on public housing, it's more financial. And when it comes to implementation of programs, it's the control, it's at the local level. The local government decides what they want to do. The money is just a pass-through. Another example is we recently forced and passed a no smoking, smoke-free policy. The interesting thing about it is it's a recommendation. It's not a requirement. A public housing authority can choose not to implement it, and there's nothing we can do. We had to specifically state in that policy that, like, you can't eject somebody if the person smokes in a public housing unit that has a smoke-free policy. So it looks like, yeah, the money is passed through hard, but our hands are tied. And there isn't that much we can do to influence some of these policies. So the help we would need is if we are able to lobby Congress for us to allow the experts to do the job instead of Congress deciding on what we can do and what we cannot do.
Okay, great. Just real briefly, we're all managing our time together here, but yeah, real briefly with Mike.
You're so right, because from what you said about some of the local projects that you cited in the Bronx, it was done during the time when I was in New York. They were really local developers who took an initiative. Both of those projects were done by really progressive developers. And at that time, Sean Donovan was our housing commissioner, who had gone on to become HUD secretary and now at OMB. I think what we professionals can do is really through a communication channels. We talk about these best practices all the time, and that's why a number of people in the audience know about these projects. So even though if you don't kind of regulate or make mandates, the opportunity to do this kind of forum to really talk about best practices is really helpful. And Sean Donovan, for the Via Verde project, he came back for groundbreaking, even though he was no longer housing commissioner, the project you saw on the screen. And we really think, at least in the New York community at that time, to promote good practices is really important. And let us know how we can help you.
Okay.
Well, no, my comment's going to lead into the next phase. So if you want to go. I just get really answer on membership of ASID. I'm very curious because you represent thousands of people on different.
Mine's like 2 comments or suggestions or call for action.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we let the panel finish responding to what Whitney's question was about, what is needed, and then we'll go right back to you, okay? And so go ahead, Fernando.
So very briefly, we are 26,000 members. I think the struggle we have is organizing that body of membership to practice in ways that are coherent and integrated. So of the 26,000, I don't know, maybe 6,000, 8,000 are very technically oriented healthcare designers, and then we have a bigger proportion of the membership that is in the residential design and decoration space. And one of the reasons why I use the prompt of consumer products, consumer goods, is I think we need tools to be able to inform the residential market about the business driver for healthy remodeling. Not just brand new construction, but also to think about the upgrades that are necessary and the minimal and the maximum, so that we can kind of, you know, capture all the different building typologies from all the different types of professionals that are out there. And I think we're just beginning to understand what that narrative will be for the bigger chunk that practice in the residential space.
Great, excellent. So I think the panel is coming on that. Let's come right back to you, please.
Well, it's two comments or suggestions I want to make is one thing I want to piggyback on what Suzanna was talking about, vocabulary, and how that's sort of is still a big challenge for, you know, there's still a big disconnect between the research and the practitioners, simply because, you know, we don't even speak the same language often, so we don't understand. And then the connection between the research and the practitioner is still very broken, in the sense that, you know, half the time we don't even know when papers get published, when research is done in the academic world, you know, let alone be able to know what that research is really telling us to include that or come up with ways to implement or even test it out. So that still is a big gap, you know, in the industry. And construction industry, as we all know, moves at an incredibly slow pace. Which kind of ties to the next comment that I want to make, is that, you know, don't forget about private partnerships. You know, I really like the opening that Judith made about, you know, often companies right now, it's people's health and performance are part of the organizational mission. And so you're really starting to see more and more companies build it in their values, which kind of, you know, fold into their actions and goals and things like that. And so I can speak for Google, like, you know, we want to know what the priorities are. What are the issues that are being, you know, discussed out there in the academic world? Because we would be more than interested to host it and, you know, try it out. Because, you know, having the privilege of being part of technology industry, our rate of change is significantly different from the construction industry. And so there are some advantages over there to really capitalize on. So just two things.
Okay, great.
And then
Jim?
when you have the amount of people that are in organizations like ours who start to get used to having spaces that incorporate health, and then they leave, then they'll start demanding. And then that's sort of a different type of customer demand.
So coming back to the panel, Angela, just let you know we're entering double overtime, but I think it's okay because this is great input. It's going to help inform. But Angela had one comment, and then come to you.
I'm going to go back and answer Jim's original question to the panel, if I may, informed by this additional discussion. My sense from hearing all this discussion is that, of course, we want to do a multi-pronged approach, and I think that there are 3 and possibly 4 outcomes that I would see from today. One is, I think, Esther's idea of a white paper aiming for something that's appropriate for New England Journal or Journal of American Medical Association is appropriate, something that's very, very widely read, that's very picked up by the media. I think that's step 1 for building momentum among medical groups and those who read the media that cover them. I think it is important that we begin to craft cross-disciplinary groups to meet on a regular basis with every one of these stakeholder groups. Having taught in the landscape architecture department at Penn, we still don't have an ASLA member here, but we need to. They have been involved in some of these areas in the past, but ASLA needs to be a part of this again. I think that we need to be working very directly with, I think it's the Mayor's Institute for Design, whatever the official name, MCID, whatever that, MICD. Yeah, that's what I said, the Mayor's Institute for, I said landscape architecture, American Society for Landscape Architecture. So I think that those are 2 groups who are missing. We've already identified the human resources people as missing, but I think we need to be crafting multidisciplinary groups of 4 people to put on, depending on the needs of the organization, sometime within the next 16 months. Every one of the groups that we target should have a cross-disciplinary group approaching them for a 2-hour symposium or something that's interesting that will then get recorded and gets out to all the membership, maybe even with a short paper from that group that then goes into that group's publication, so that every group is at least on some basic page. I think the last thing that we need to do, I say the last because the last in my group, is that we have to follow Whitney's recommendation. There has to be a movement. And what we don't have in this group are the people who create movements. We don't have the branding people. We don't have those who do product placement. How do you make that happen? We're all pretty good at it, we think, but we aren't the people who are primarily communications people. And we don't have that piece in this group. I think it's easy enough to engage some people in that because this is an area of very, very broad interest. But I think we need to begin to design those programs, put them out on the web, get that product placement out there, build this movement, build the Fitbit movement, build the no smoking movement. We don't have it, and we just need to build it. This is the group to do that. My piece is
Great,
done.
excellent. We'll have a standing ovation for the entire panel at our close, but that certainly was worthy of one. Let's get some audience comments, then we'll come back to the panel to do similar to what Angela did. Please.
So great minds think alike. My comment is really, I know we're in the last part. I think we all have found sometimes that targeted working groups can be really effective for moving forward in the next year. And themes that I've heard have been a policy working group. I mean, we could use models and best case practices. For example, I'm thinking of cities of comparing, what have complex organizations done to implement difficult legislation or trying to get uptake? I mean, there's a great case study of City of Toronto versus City of Chicago implementing green roof legislation. What worked and what didn't? How are those lessons applied? How can we get like a policy working group? Maybe you get like an organization membership working group. What do they keep hearing back from their members, what they need? Maybe you get a research working group. What do we know? What do we still not know? Hey, these great technologies. Are they advanced enough for us to be able to tell the ASID membership, AI membership, yeah, no problem, you go ahead and use it. Or, hey, do you mind testing this out? So my sort of proposal is that maybe, it's a little crazy idea, but maybe the next section we're doing is we talk about maybe possible working groups, and we target our discussion to what those working groups could achieve in the next
Excellent.
year.
Excellent. Good. Yes, Kevin.
Get people who haven't got it.
Thank you. I had a very similar thought to what Esther said and what you're saying. How do we bring attention to what we're speaking about here to the public and being more from the tech community? I mean, making an acquisition like Nest for $3 billion makes the news, but that's not a scalable way to get news. And so if you think of the healthy building movement as a triangle, and we would be at the top, or you guys would be at the top of it, and the average person is at the bottom of it, and a publication is great, a scientific peer-reviewed paper is great, and that's pushing down on the triangle, but how do we get to the bottom? And so when I was on my flight here, the lady that sat beside me worked at a big multinational bank, and she said she's pretty high up at this bank, and she's working from home because they installed a new carpet that's off-gassing. And just the fact that she knew what off-gassing was and that she should stay home, I thought was very impressive. But I think we should think about, what does the average person know? What is that? If I just stopped somebody in the mall and said, hey, do you know about this, this, and that? What are they going to know? And so our collective audience, this gentleman brought up that leadership is how many followers you have. Our collective following is segregated. Like, you guys have 87,000, you have 26,000. What about a collective following? So I'm thinking about when the average person thinks about health and reading about health and getting information about health, where do they turn to? What is that publication? Popular Science, for the scientific-minded consumers. What is?
Yeah, I was going to say it's Dr. Oz, Oprah,
Right.
Home Garden Television. I mean, it's really pedestrian channels, and the challenge is that for those particular channels or platforms to provide compelling, rigorous, it starts to get too technical and it becomes off-putting. So, Yeah, but I think interesting to your point about the grassroots, I do think that we do have opportunities, particularly through the NIH and other organizations, to get more conversations started and to hear narratives, to hear testimonials, to hear experiences from people who live in environments that can be both challenging and also very productive, optimized spaces as well as compromised spaces. So maybe that's part of one of our tasks with the working groups, is being able to also go out into the field. And, HIBR, not everybody who participates in these calls is here in this room today. So I think that figuring out some of the ways that we can charge the members of the HIBR to do more of that grassroots contribution of storytelling and of capturing narratives will be probably something that we should really focus on for 2016.
Right. So just to summarize, I think we should pay attention to the average person, and this sounds completely crazy, but if we all formed a collective consumer publication,
you need 5 now.
that individually your organizations contribute certain content to. I mean, some of you are coming out with amazing content, amazing publications. If somebody was unified in telling the stories of these publications, and we could reach so many people, it could become the de facto source of knowledge.
Well, if anybody in this room has a contact at the Consumer Protection Bureau, please let me know, because I think that is the place that we could take that kind of ask to.
So I'm on the Board of Regents of the National Library of Medicine, and that is one of the mission statements of the National Library of Medicine, getting out to the consumer, and they do that really well. So that could be something that we could engage another institute of the NIH to help to do that. It's a great idea. Actually, they have a consumer publication, and we could do a whole issue on it.
I think we're going to need the convention center for the next meeting. But actually, I see. But maybe I think to go back a bit, I don't know if this, Susan, may have meant something a bit different about talking to the people who are the most affected by what we do, because we create the built environment, at least the people in building, but there are people out there that are fighting for the same issues that we're talking about here, and those are particularly these days the environmental justice movements. Also, we had I don't know if she actually made it, but in the first conference, we intended to have Charlotte Brody of the Blue-Green Alliance to get people like that who are out there trying to lift the health of people. And we're trying to do it from the top by getting designers to stop buying or specifying materials that hurt people. And they're coming from the other direction. They're in the communities where these materials are being made, so they're being hurt. They're living in buildings that aren't properly ventilated and so on. So you've really opened a lot of doors here for ways to go.
Great. Can we go back to the panel? Angela made a real good set of recommendations in regard to priorities. Can we get similarly from everyone else, just really briefly? And then we're going to have a few announcements and then continue our work together.
Can you restate the question, please?
No, I actually forgot. No, well, let's refer to the title of this panel, which is how do we apply?
Okay.
Conveniently worded. So it's your top priorities. How do we apply it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been mentioned a couple of times. Esther is a member. The AIA launched in 2014 the first of its kind Design and Health Research Consortium. It's comprised of, currently 11 teams. We'll announce a second cohort very soon. Next week, we'll be announcing our second cohort of co-disciplinary teams. And our efforts there are certainly to advance the body of knowledge around design and health, but really what we want is translation. And I just can't emphasize this enough, that the ability, to your point, the ability for us to take this research and put it into a format that is consumable. For us, it's for the practitioner, but it's also for policymakers to emphasize that point again as well. Translating research into practice and policy is, for me, the most important thing that we could do to make this movement really accelerate and take hold. And it ain't easy. It is a very difficult nut to crack. A year in with this consortium, there's been a lot of lessons that we've learned. We're finding that teams that are that have long-standing partnerships and deep engagement in their communities are the ones that are benefiting the most from being part of a larger group. But we don't want to stop there. We want to bring folks along. We want to nurture new emerging teams. And this translation nut that we are trying to crack, be it through case studies or infographics or education or publications. We'll be releasing our second publication later this month. It's a lot of experimentation. We don't really, maybe I shouldn't say this on the recorded line. So we're experimenting, and we would love feedback from you about what's working and what's not working and what we could do better, because I think we could all learn from each other there.
Excellent, thank you. Fernando, any?
I think I want to percolate a little bit deeper, and I intended that in the last session we would drive to action together. So I don't know if I have a Magna Carta for what interior designers can do to translate, a lot of the conversations to practice. I think that we are defining that pretty much every day, and so the intent, very much to Esther's call to action for those worksheets that I put out there, was to begin the process of organizing thoughts, content, suggestions, et cetera, so that we could start developing through the HIBR a little bit of a practicum around this and then figure out what to do from there. So I don't know if I have any recommendations at this time, but I just want to say that I'm active in the pursuit of figuring out how to translate the theory and the rhetoric into something actionable at different scales.
Excellent. Kofi? Anything to add?
Well, I don't think I have any specific recommendation at this time. The reason being, from where I stand, when you're proposing something, you should have like a lot of studies to back it, and the studies have to be like very like more representative, and then something that can stand the test of court. So, yeah, to me, the circadian study looks very promising. It's interesting. I like it, but I think it's something that it's like on cutting edge, and it's just beginning to flourish. So I don't specifically have any recommendation at this time.
Okay, excellent. Oops, one last. Yeah.
I thought she was going to say Google's doodles should be more about health.
That could be too.
Are we still using the mic, or have we gone? Who has the mic? Okay. Traffic control. How do we partner with Google? Can we have just a brief comment there, and then we'll close for announcements? I'm sorry. I come back to you.
So, like I was saying earlier, don't forget the private partnerships. I mean, we are a resource in ways of like either hosting research or, trying experimenting, or even sometimes we're ourselves building tools in our little woodshed, because none of them exist out there. And, we obviously, our goal is to have 1,000 Googles doing this and asking for this so that every consumer is demanding this from, for themselves, from their employers and things like that. So there are many ways to partner, and, I guess, we just have to talk.
Well, the partnership is not always very quickly established. There are some folks in this room who can attest to that, but we'll try our best.
Okay, great. One last comment, and then we're going to give this great panel a standing ovation, and then we're going to have some announcements.
Okay, one of the things I wanted to tag on to for what Fernando said and bridge to what Esther said this morning was on triggers and identifying triggers that lead to specific behaviors and designing to solve those problems and this is something we've just recently done in our office, is designing to triggers, and those triggers being identified from what we're learning on the medical healthcare side. For example, designing for triggers for a dementia resident is different than designing for triggers in an oncology suite. And once we know what those triggers are, we can find solutions that change the environment to change the behavior and have better outcomes.
Excellent, good. And I would just add, this has been great, I would just add that I think one of the most important things is to build on where there is existing momentum. I mean, that's a very set strategy. And there are these sectors that just we aren't engaging with. There is, for instance, some of you may be aware, but a Green Sports Alliance, which includes conferences and all kinds of things that are very environmentally conscious, that are very health-oriented conscious in regard to buildings and dwellings and venues and that sort of thing. So build where the existing momentum exists. Before we have our announcements, can we give a great standing ovation to this wonderful panel, please? And now some announcements. This is the part of the meeting where we're just this live television, so we're seeing what we're doing.
We'll let you really quickly in 2 minutes say who each of you are. But anyway, the idea then is for each team to design, however you brainstorm want to do it. I don't care if it's on Mars. Design the best workplace building possible. It's true brainstorming, gee-whizzing, and they're going to lead you. Now they can each tell you who they are.
We design the best workplace.
Well,
so we're scientists, or we're
I'm an architect. Is that quick enough?
Yeah, whatever you want to say. What do you want your...
Well, I think that this last session has broken everything wide open. So I would say if you want to talk about anything at all, then that's my group. So.
So this is the first time that we are hearing that this is what we are doing today. That there was going to be a grand challenge. It was a little new curve, but we'd expect that from you, Charlene. We like it. So it's building on it. It keeps things real. So Whitney Austin Gray, the Well Building Standard.
That's all right. They know who you are. You talked already.
I am supposed to represent the panel that I was on, so data to practice to policy.
Angela Loader, Green the City, and also Jefferson County Public Health, and I'm representing research side. I think from what we said before, right?
Fernando Arias. I am an architect practicing in an interior design association, or working in an interior design association, so I guess I'll focus on interiors or something. I think to some extent, let me just preempt here, we will probably figure out what the scope is. I think that the curveball today of this moment happening is ultimately in the spirit of trying to drive action out of these conferences. And I do have a very soft spot for Charles bringing together all this diverse group. I think that the next wave of this is figuring out the manifestation of it. So in Charlene's mind, this is the ideal a project.
In my mind, it came forward from some other HIBR people.
Brilliant. Okay. So, and I think that to some extent, I feel like there's already a lot of guidance around how to do these ideal buildings and spaces from standards and codes, et cetera. So I think we'll figure out a constructive way to do that so that it also folds in material science, it folds in the health voices, it folds in a lot of other disciplines. And then we'll figure out what the winning entry requirements are, guidelines, specifications, criteria, et cetera. And we'll probably have that for you in our very next HIBR call starting January of next year. Yes. Meanwhile, don't forget that I think we may just get half an hour of upstairs time. And if anything else, just at least put your name down on the sheets and identify what panel you were most interested in and maybe some opportunities to take action.
All right. Okay, so I might amend this because I think it's a really big question and it's a really hard question, and I think that there's no perfect place that equals health because each place is unique. I might send out to everyone, see how you guys feel about thinking about yourself as a large developer. We're often have the opportunity to engage with large developers who say, great, I want to design for health, I want to do this. How do I do this? What's the perfect package? So who do I invite on board? When do I invite them on board? How do you engage in the process? How do you test that you've actually done that? I'd like to see what is a perfect package. What's the process that you would take to make sure the right people are at the table at the right time, considering how to translate research, considering how to evaluate it, to actually create a healthy place?
While you're doing this, I want to throw out a new challenge. There was absolutely no discussion today about climate change and climate adaptation. Our buildings are going to have to be designed and operated differently in the future. And I want you all to think about what the health implications of that is going to be, because we haven't discussed this at all, and I think they're going to be huge. And that is a future issue for us, and we don't know at this point. But I think that is sort of something we really, really need to think about for this next conference. And however you guys want to arrange this is your stuff. Charlene and I are out of here. You're the next generation. And Kevin, we haven't heard from you today. This is the famous Kevin who everybody is saying nice things about. He's been hiding over here in the corner.
I just want to agree with Judy about the climate change and resilience, for one thing, but also caution that we actually do know. We do know enough to act now. We do know enough to build it into the design. The data are there. And we know it at a very discrete level of geography, too. And the interesting thing is, just to make everybody sort of really cheerful in this week of Paris discussions, if you look at a map of the United States, of all of the geography of the United States that is likely to be subjected to severe events over the next 30 years, beyond what we've experienced before, and it's just one extreme event type, the entire country is covered. So the sobering thought is that the policymakers are only concentrating on those areas which are certain to be confronted with 3 different types of severe events. And that gets you a strange thing. So one of the things, for example, that you may not know is that drought, which we all associate with the Southwest, is actually going to affect the Southeast. And not only the Southeast, but the Northeast, the far Northeast, which we are currently considering, water plentiful areas. So what we think we know is not actually what's going to be likely to happen. And I think that it's an interesting challenge for this group of teams to look at with that filter too, because if we start thinking about the kinds of things that make buildings work for people and do sort of the most fundamental thing that buildings do, which is shelter, you can't do it in buildings that are, I would suggest to you, are fundamentally unhealthy. Closed buildings that rely 100% on mechanical systems. So you have to think about buildings that are flexible and adaptable, and those are the buildings that we find are more healthy and encourage things. So you can't seal up the buildings, use variable air volume, and prevent basically the building from breathing, because if you prevent the building from breathing, you will prevent the people in the building from breathing. And I think it's a really, really good point to bring out at this stage of the game. And since I have the mic, no, that's really what I wanted to say. I'm really have to congratulate, before we lose sight of this, Charlene and Judy for putting this on. I think it shows great insight into what it is that we're confronted in, how far we've come in the past several years, but also the closeness of the possibility of making real and lasting change in not only the design profession, but all of the professions that are associated with it. And I also, I heard a lot of discussion about what the right answer is, or who's the right lever and everything else. And I would just suggest that that is an unanswerable question because it's an all of the above answer. It's not just one translation, it's multiple translations. It's not just one audience, it's multiple audiences. It's not, if you don't have the rank and file, you're not going to succeed, because sometimes you can do it. And I'll even disagree with my colleague from the AIA who suggested that code officials weren't the right audience. I think they are one of the right audiences. It is true that if you build to code, you build the most lousy building you can get away with. But it's also true that there are enlightened code officials that do performance path work. And so those are the ones that we talk about. Right.
I think we bring them in.
Yes, so we have to. I mean, I think we have to get everybody interested, and we'll find that it will really build on that. And people fundamentally want to be healthy. They know it's good, but it's, as Angela says, you either have to make it so easy or you have to make it impossible to avoid. And I think we have to do both of those things too. So anyway, thank you all for the work you're about to do over the next year and the great day that we've had.
Y'all might, the National Academies has a report, 2 years ago, on indoor air quality and climate change. You can download it from the National Academy's website, if you don't mind using a lot of paper. It's John Spangler and Vivian Lofness were the editors.
Can I say something?
I didn't know what to expect of today. And I'm really and issues and so on. The fact that that is still an active, alive, vibrant conversation, it's both inspiring and it's encouraging. So I would like to see myself get involved as an engineer and look to see what we can do both in the data, the translation, and the tools end of things, and the call to action. So I just want to thank the group, and I don't even remember what else I wanted to say, but thank you.
I think we may not have time to design the perfect
We weren't supposed to do it today.
building, but okay, but I think because in a way, I don't think we have. Anyway, but I think a lot of us. It reminds me of when I went to architecture school and I discovered that a lot of architects want to design houses for themselves and make other people live in them, and that's. Yeah, and that's the kind of giving nature of architects. But I liked Angela's idea of think about a place that's calm, and so we have Joyce's balcony, and we have the walks in the woods or some things like that are the kinds of things that are really big subjects which we need to think about more. And I think what would be most productive, and maybe before people can leave, is to write some comments on the questionnaire that Fernando put out, because I think that we already have brought up a lot of great topics. We should be able to piece together major issues from that. But I think this has been such a rich conversation. I don't know how the rest of the panel feels.
I'd like to just say, to make the little worksheets even just palatable at 4:45, write something that you could attribute as a little testimonial of what you experienced today. Because practically, we're not really going to be able to drive an agenda with what we intended to do. But leave a statement, including your name and your email if you want to be followed up with and you want to be reached. Because we'd like to capture some of these ideas from what you thought was valuable. Each of us will have to connect together, huddle, and figure out what the boundaries of what we are charged to do. But it sounds like we will be also the future organizers of this conference, and so we're going to try to deliver the most valuable experience for your time and for your constituents. So I hope that folks feel like they can still have a little bit of action today, even with just a little bit of writing that you do in that paper, which will mean so much to us as a takeaway from the whole conference.
And maybe can I add to that, if you have ideas about what you think maybe a working group could be that you may be interested in joining, then put that in, and maybe we can take kind of a vote on sort of positioning people in. And if you have ideas of who else needs to be involved in that working group, I think that would be a great sort of efficient step forward.
And I think if you have any really good examples of things that you've seen or read or whatever that deal with either the translation or whatever, that would be really helpful to this group. I'm thinking about an infographic that was in the Washington Post sometime in the past year about sitting. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it made me never want to sit again for long periods of time. It was the best infographic I have ever seen. It had everything in there in one page, and just all of the health impacts of what happens to your skeleton, your muscles, everything. So, did you have anything to do with that, Angela? It was amazing. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Well, make sure you get it. It was really powerful. Really powerful.